Think about it for a second. When society completely collapses, what kind of monsters actually emerge from within? It's a question that has haunted storytellers for generations. But over the last 15 years, one specific medium has used this existential premise not just to show us cool, terrifying creatures, but to pull back the curtain on the absolute darkest, most uncomfortable truths about human nature.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going on a bit of a journey today, a literal descent, really, into the psychological and thematic evolution of the dystopian anime genre. We're going to look at how these stories have grown up right alongside their audiences, completely transforming from action-packed survival thrillers into deeply unsettling reflections of our own real-world anxieties. To map out this descent, we'll quickly trace the genre's evolution, starting with the raw survival of early cult classics, hitting the massive apex of Attack on Titan, looking at the mid-decade scramble to copy its success, and finally plunging into the new, deeply psychological standard of today. So let's start by looking at how post-apocalyptic anime has actually evolved. If you look back over the last decade and a half, the industry has totally shattered the traditional end-of-the-world format. What used to be a genre defined purely by physical survival against hordes of enemies has steadily matured into this sophisticated landscape of mystery boxes, moral ambiguity, and just pure philosophical dread. We can track this exact maturation by looking at 5 pivotal properties. We'll begin in 2010 with High School of the Dead, witness the earth-shattering debut of Attack on Titan in 2013, watch the industry scramble to replicate it with Seraph of the End and Covenary of the Iron Fortress, and eventually land on the modern masterpiece of 2023, Heavenly Delusion. But to really understand where we are now, we have to look at where we started, the era of raw survival.
Back in 2010, the dystopian landscape was defined by visceral, unfiltered action, and High School of the Dead has a truly unique legacy here. Directed by Tetsuro Araki over at Madhouse, it completely highlighted the civilian struggle. This wasn't about trained soldiers with a master plan, right? It was about everyday teenagers facing pure social Darwinism, where other human beings were often far more dangerous than the actual zombies. It achieved massive cult classic status, but it also carries this deeply tragic real-world reality. The series remains permanently unfinished following the untimely passing of its writer, Daisuke Sato, in 2017. So it just stands there as this chaotic artifact of its time.
But as the audience matured, the genre had to adapt, and it forced storytellers to ask a pretty heavy question. What happens when mere survival just isn't enough anymore, and humanity actually has to confront the very structures that built their ruined world in the first place? Well, the answer to that question would entirely redefine the global entertainment landscape.
Which brings us to 2013, and the absolute apex of the genre, Attack on Titan.
This series took the raw, primal fear of being eaten alive, and it slowly, methodically pulled the camera back to reveal this grueling cycle of hatred and macro geopolitics. And we really need to emphasize just how dominant this show became. It sits at a massive 9.1 overall rating on IMDb. Mathematically speaking, that doesn't just make it a great anime, it places it as one of the highest-rated television series in human history, period. It constantly went toe-to-toe with prestige live-action dramas and sustained that excellence for over a decade, keeping viewers hooked on a narrative that absolutely refused to pander to simple heroic tropes.
And the characters were the engine of that success. Take a look at this community quote, it hits the nail on the head. The protagonist, Eren Yeager, completely changed the game. Attack on Titan took its cast from being reactive, traumatized kids just screaming at monsters, and brilliantly evolved them into proactive, morally compromised political actors. You weren't just rooting for the good guys anymore, you were actively questioning if good guys even existed in this world.
But that creates a massive problem for the rest of the industry, doesn't it? How on earth do you follow up a transcendent, once-in-a-decade masterpiece when a single show elevates the ceiling of the medium this drastically? The attempts to replicate that success almost always result in some serious creative friction.
And that leads us right into the mid-decade contenders.
Wit Studio, the exact same production powerhouse behind the early, groundbreaking seasons of Attack on Titan, made 2 incredibly ambitious attempts to capture lightning in a bottle twice. We got Seraph of the End, which gave us vampires mixed with high-tech military occultism, and Covenary of the Iron Fortress, which delivered this stunning steampunk world of armored trains and undead hordes. Now, their strengths were undeniable. You had breathtaking animation and those iconic, booming soundtracks by composer Hiroyuki Sawano. But unfortunately, both series faced heady criticism. We're talking rushed pacing, pretty cliched villains, and narrative convolution that really bogged down their second halves.
When you starkly contrast the apex predator against its ambitious successors, the differences are glaring. Attack on Titan succeeded because of its impeccably tight narrative architecture on a macro geopolitical scale. Everything meant something. The mid-decade contenders, while visually spectacular, often focused on more micro-level themes of family or scientific experimentation, but they ultimately struggled to maintain structural coherence under the sheer weight of their own ambition.
So the industry reached a crossroads. If the massive, macro-scale epic had already been perfected, where could the dystopian genre actually go to evoke true fear and captivate an audience that was now highly sophisticated? The answer was to deliberately shift the focus inward.
Enter the new era of post-apocalyptic storytelling, the psychological standard. No recent series encapsulates this intimate psychological horror quite like 2023's Heavenly Delusion. It completely trades giant, flashy battles for a slow burn descent into existential unease. It relies heavily on what we call a mystery box narrative. Instead of just handing you an opening exposition dump explaining how the apocalypse happened, it forces you to actively piece together the world building through subtle, delayed clues. It actually respects your intelligence. And by doing so, it gets so deeply under your skin. And it pulls this off through a dual narrative genius. On one side, you have the journey, Maru and Kiriko navigating a devastated wasteland full of literal man-eaters, wrestling with incredibly heavy themes of trauma and identity, especially when you realize Kiriko's mind is existing inside a completely different body. But then on the other side, you have the academy, children with special abilities isolated inside these pristine robotic walls, completely unaware of the outside world. The true horror and the brilliance of the show emerges as you slowly start to realize exactly how these two timelines connect.
Now, looking at the community pulse surrounding Heavenly Delusion is actually pretty fascinating. In Japan, the physical sales were remarkably low. We're talking less than 700 copies sold, which historically spells doom for an anime. But it has cultivated this massive international cult following, aided by a highly profitable licensing deal with Disney. Plus, recent trademark renewals have communities buzzing with rampant theories and hopes for a season 2. It really proves that in this modern era, a show's survival is increasingly global and digital rather than just relying on local physical media.
As we reach the bottom of our descent today, we have to ask, what does the future of the genre look like?
The medium has clearly transitioned into sophisticated inquiries regarding human nature. The modern post-apocalyptic story isn't just about outrunning zombies anymore. It's about the ethics of warfare, the crushing burden of truth, and the incredible, sometimes terrifying resilience of the human spirit. This maturation deeply rewards audiences who are looking for complex world-building and emotionally immersive, totally uncompromising storytelling. Which leaves us with one final, provocative thought to chew on. As these fictional apocalypses continue to grow more intimate and psychologically complex, what exactly are they reflecting about our own real-world anxieties today? Are we simply watching characters survive a ruined world for entertainment, or are we confronting our own deep-seated fears about the fragility of the society we've built? Think about that next time you dive into one of these incredible worlds. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the narratives around you.